Hello, welcome to the podcast. Good evening. We're hanging out in the bar. I'm your host, Nate.
And I'm Jason, your co-host.
Did you check the audio quality on this?
Yeah, I checked it.
Oh, all right.
Do you want to listen to it?
No, that's all right.
Okay.
We'll continue.
Yeah, fuck
Keep,
it.
keep it rolling.
Dude, not even gonna cut that, bro.
Roll tape or whatever they say.
Roll Tide, baby.
Well, that's not it. That's not what
No.
they say.
No? Wrong one?
Yep. How are you?
I'm doing good, dog. How about you?
Pretty okay.
Pretty okay.
It's a busy day.
Yeah. Very busy day. Mother's Day weekend. Happy Mother's Day to
Oh, yeah, it's Mother's
everyone
Day.
out there. Or it was yesterday. It's 1:40 a.m. It was a very busy day.
It was a really we work in this restaurant bar and so we're just doing takeout right now and we got slammed today. It was crazy. It was like everybody that wanted Mother's Day brunch filled up the Mother's Day brunch slot, and then we had to kick it to dinner. So we were just busy all day. So
And then
been
by
a really
dinner
busy day.
time, we had no available ordering times anymore.
And we ran out of food and drinks. Actually, ran out of drinks too.
Yeah, we ran out of everything.
And it's hot. It's like 85 degrees
Yeah.
in Seattle. It's nuts. Anyway, we are talking history tonight.
Yeah.
Some revolutionary ideas.
Yeah. Get the hint. It's the French Revolution, though, not the American Revolution.
Nope.
Another time, maybe, though. Another time.
You out there were so, yeah, America, so patriotic and thinking it was American. It's not.
Yeah. Well, and that French Revolution was pretty key to, well, not the French Revolution, but, France was pretty key into our success to becoming independent, so.
It's true. They kind of funded our war for us.
Yeah, so any French people, you're the real MVPs, dude. You're the real ones.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, France.
Yeah. Thanks, France.
Appreciate it.
On behalf of the entire nation, me and Nate are thanking you.
All right, so the French Revolution, it lasted from 1789 to 1799. So 10 years, the end of the 18th century. End of the 18th century. Leading up to this, the whole world's kind of at war. The 7 Years' War is pretty prominent, lasting from 1756 to 1763. So kind of 20 years prior, you have most of the world kind of involved in just these big conflicts that involved Europe, America, Asia, India, just kind of a whole lot of wars going on, and so most of the world is kind of starting to fall into debt because they're just funding these wars that are constantly going on and on and on. So that's kind of leading us into it, and then the French obviously had their own role to play in that.
Yeah. So, in the 17th century, a new king comes about, King Louis XVI, and he becomes king after his grandfather dies. And King Louis is kind of like the start to the whole revolution, kind of, plays a part in it. And so his grandfather dies and he becomes king, and at this time, King Louis is only 20 years old. So he's a very young person, and it's a huge responsibility, and even he kind of knew that he was kind of over his head. Like he was pretty unsure with how qualified he was really to be king, and he kind of voiced those concerns early on. But it's a monarchy and it's passed down through heritage, so. And you
get what you get.
Yeah, you're it, dog, so buckle up, buttercup.
I mean, he was generally kind of in the early days, he was a liked person. He generally did what he thought was best for the people and what the people wanted. He made some bad political moves because he thought that the people would want it, and he wanted to be liked, and so he's like, this is what people want, so I'm going to do it, even if it was kind of bad for the country. That including the American Revolution. So France kind of helped fund the American Revolution. They sent troops, they sent supplies, weapons, kind of secretively, just to kind of get back at Britain, their longtime rival. So, and that was one of the first political or
like mistakes.
mistakes, but kind of like the first foreign relations that he really played a major part in. And he's like, look, we can get some serious allies in with America, and then we can also get back at Britain.
Yeah.
So let's do that. It'll make us right. And then we ended up signing a treaty with or not a treaty. We'll call it a treaty. Whatever. It's not a treaty, but
an agreement.
An agreement with America, saying that if France and Britain ever go to war, then America is going to ally with France. So he looks at it as kind of like a win-win. He's like, great, we get allies, and we get to kick Britain's ass again. So.
Yeah. It kind of seemed like it was mostly like, fuck Britain. I
Yeah.
don't want to do anything to fuck
I mean,
them
honestly,
over. Yeah.
fuck Britain, though.
Yeah, honestly, you fucking nasty teeth bitches. What?
Jeez. Take it easy
Just
there,
kidding,
Captain.
Just kidding. Sorry.
Alliance. That was the word I was looking for earlier. Alliance.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of the start. Like, they're funding the Revolutionary War, and they're having like a bunch, and all of Europe is pretty much at war, and there's a bunch of fighting going on between everyone, and fighting wars cost lots and lots of money, so
At least.
yeah,
At least lots.
at least lots, if not a lot of money.
A lot.
Yeah, so very quickly, like, France is just borrowing a bunch of money from all these banks and stuff, and eventually all the banks are like, no. So they're not giving France any more money, and so in order for France to get any more money, they have to like start paying off their debt, and then also like just to collect more taxes. And the way that the taxes are kind of set up is that mostly the peasants are paying like all of the tax, actually, like all of it. And so all this tax is happening. France is in a financial crisis, and France is also experiencing a lot of famine right now because the winters have been really bad, and also they're at war, and war is not really good for agriculture at all. So France is kind of in a really bad spot as King Louis kind of just starting his reign, really.
So France realizes that they're in this predicament. They're like, all right, we're kind of in a shitty spot right now. We're out of money. Let's bring together our government and figure this out. So the government up until now is called the Estates General. Well, probably something in French, but whatever. And that's essentially it's like a build-up based on the three estates, and I'm using quotation marks. You have estate 1, which is the clergy, the nobility. Estate 2, which is the clergy, and estate 3, which is everybody else. You have the common folk, you have the poor people, everybody. And estate 3, the common people, make up 98% of France's population, and 1% going into estates 1 and 2, respectively. And so it hadn't. Calling the Estates General essentially means that everybody's going to get into a room and they're going to talk it out. And the way it works is each estate gets one vote. So people put up ideas, and then each estate votes on it. And the way it usually works is because everybody's held equal, somebody will say, hey, the third estate should pay all the taxes. And then estate 1 and 2 say yay, and estate 3 says nay, but it's a 2-1, so estate 3 loses literally every time.
Yeah. So, like, so basically, like, it's set up in a theoretically kind of fair way, but, it's basically a 2-1 vote every time, because whatever is going to be good for the nobles and the clergy, they're just going to team up together because it's going to be mutually beneficial for them both, just to like continuously tax the like lower or the third estate, but also just like King Louis also tried to have a tax reform to help change how the tax system works so that like nobles and clergy also paid taxes, but the Parlement, who's like kind of the panel of judges in France, so basically they propose a bill and they vote on it and then it becomes law, but they can just like straight up refuse to acknowledge like bills and stuff, so that's kind of what happened. So they were just refusing to acknowledge bills being passed to basically have them be taxed, and then so that just is kind of like another like wiggle, like kind of just like a flaw in how kind of like loaded the system is in favor of just the top two branches, really.
So it comes into the third estate is going to pay more taxes to fix the economic turmoil the country's now in. And obviously the third estate's not thrilled. You know, they already have been taxed up. Everything is getting taxed. Salt's getting taxed. Bread's getting taxed. Wheat's getting taxed. And the bread apparently was a really big thing because they're like, bread consists of like 90% of our diet, and now it's getting jacked up. Like there were bakers that were murdered because they thought they were holding bread from people. So
Yeah,
the bread getting too expensive was a really big deal, and the third estate is now getting taxes added, which then really leads us into kind of the revolution, and when the country decides to take a step back and reevaluate and then kind of kill everybody.
Yeah. A real revolution. Yeah. So, well, basically before any like real blood or anything happens, but there'll be plenty of it. So, basically, the third branch or the third estate realizes that this is a bunch of bullshit, and they get mad and they start kind of protesting, and then they decide to kind of have their own assembly, and then they're holding the actual estates general, they literally get locked out of the building by like King Louis because they're kind of causing a ruckus, and King Louis doesn't really like what they're saying, and the third branch ends up leaving, and they go to a nearby tennis court where the famous tennis court oath is vowed, and this was just a promise that they wouldn't disband until they have a fully realized like French constitution and like declaration of like making everyone citizens and kind of making everyone equal, or most of everyone equal, like mostly men, you know, as usual.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
So we've got the third estate who essentially says, fuck it, we're out. And they're like, we're going to make our own government with blackjack and hookers. That's a Futurama reference.
Nice.
Anyway. And so they go off and they're like, we're going to make our own government called the National Assembly. And this National Assembly is meeting, and then the king's like, no, I don't like that. So he locks their building. They go to a tennis court. And my beef is that they're always like, this is the famous tennis court oath. And I'm like, I only ever have heard about this when I'm looking into this topic. So
True.
I don't know how famous it is. But anyway, so they decide that they're not going to stop revolting until they get a new government.
Yeah.
And this National Assembly is kind of led by this guy named Maximilien Robespierre, who plays a pretty big part in the revolution as a whole. He's an up-and-coming law student, raised from a poor family, and he kind of inherently has a beef with the king, because when he's in law school, we have the king, Louis XVI, and Marie Antoinette, his wife, the queen, roll up to his, I think it was his graduation at this law school. And Maximilian Robespierre goes out and he reads them a speech, and the king doesn't even bother to get out of his cart. And then Maximilian writes this speech for the king. The king doesn't even get out of his cart, and then he just takes off. So Maximilian starts to have this like ever growing beef with the king, which we'll eventually get into when we get to the exciting part.
Yeah.
So we'll get there. But just keep this Robespierre guy in the back of your head, because it's going to get more exciting.
Mm-hmm.
History is fun.
Yeah.
You just kind of get to like tell a story.
Yeah. Sure.
It's too bad we don't have graphics,
I mean,
like a video up, and we can like have this Robespierre guy sneak around in the back.
yeah.
It looks good in my head. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe,
Doesn't
you're not explaining it well. Maybe not.
That's got to be it. It's the explanation.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying is a good idea. Yeah. So basically, from here on now, there's just a lot of protests going on because the National Assembly is kind of like, the voice for the people. They make up 98% of the population. So, when in that branch, it kind of encompasses like soldiers and merchants and like the farmers and pretty much everyone of the society who's not a noble or a churchman. So, basically the other two branches are just severely outnumbered, and everyone's just protesting, and basically it's just like, at this point, it's just like, if they want to, they could just take over the country in a whole. So a bunch of rioting is happening, and eventually kind of the first like spillage of blood in like the actual revolution happens on July 14th at the Bastille Fortress, which is a prison where admittedly not very many prisoners are being held. I think it's like in the single digits.
Yeah, it's like 2.
Yeah.
It's like 2 prisoners there.
Literally no one's there. It's just a bunch of guards and a bunch of weapons, which is mostly the reason why they attacked the Bastille, because they wanted to get their hands on a cache of weapons, and also it was just like a bunch of soldiers there, and everything's elevated, and so basically they just took that and kind of secured a cache of weapons and now soldiers for the whole revolution to really start like churning and getting up to speed.
They're like, okay, things are heating up. We're going to need some guns.
Yeah.
So they storm the castle, literally, go in, take the guns. They cut off the general's head, who was stationed there, stick his head on a spike, and start parading it around the streets of Paris. And that's when the king is like, okay, this is kind of getting serious. Like, we're going to have to start listening. So the king actually shows up in Paris for the first time in a long time, because he's been at the palace in Versailles. So he shows up in Paris wearing the revolutionary attire, which is kind of like a blue and red outfit. Anyway, there's mostly colors, but he shows up wearing that just to kind of show respect. That okay, he's willing to start negotiating and listening, because this is clearly going to be a thing that the people want. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Meanwhile, we have all the nobles of the country kind of taking off. So a lot of the wealthy families are actually leaving France, going to other countries just in the surrounding area, and actually asking their governments to help retake France. They're like, okay, this is really heating up in France. We need to kind of retake France away from this National Assembly, because it's becoming a real thing, which leads into the the Declaration of Pillnitz, which is essentially a bunch of different European leaders actually sign on, saying that they wish to restore Louis to his full power and to kind of smash the revolution, because essentially it makes them money in the long run. But
Yeah.
they really don't, the other countries don't want to see all these revolutions, because they're worried that their people are going to revolt and then they're going to have their own revolution on their hands. So they want to restore power to the king in France, essentially just as a
Precaution.
as a precaution, kind of like as a show of force that, hey, don't fuck with your own government because you'll just get smashed.
Yeah. Monarchs generally like monarchs, and then that's just like, it's much easier to kind of get what you want out of a country if you just have to convince one dude to
True.
side with you, as opposed to like
The whole government.
talking to one dude and then he talks to the whole government. He's like, I don't think they're gonna go for it, dude. So generally there's like a whole kind of coalition of like other European monarchs kind of gearing up to help Louis out and to take back France. But in that time, so what happens is the National Assembly like continues to take it further, and they're like, okay, we are. I forget what the name of their actual kind of declaration was, but it was kind of like it was kind of like our Constitution, where they made everyone equal. There's no lordships or there's no titles anymore. No one's like a duke or whatever. So everyone's just a citizen, and much like ours, like these come with guaranteed rights such as speech and religion, and and so, which is such like a radical idea, because like, just like a few months ago, like France had like an official religion, and then you can say whatever you want, but now it's just like everyone has all these freedoms to do what they would like, and that kind of helped speed up the whole thing, because people could talk out about changes, and everything was more open. And then another big event that happened was on October 5th with the Women's March. So we also didn't talk about Marie Antoinette at all.
Oh, I figured we'd get there.
I'm about to do it.
All right, get there.
Yeah, it's kind of
Get there, baby.
yeah. So basically, Marie Antoinette is King Louis's wife, and she's part of the Habsburg Empire, which is the empires that are. It's like a collection of countries in Europe. It's kind of like an East and West, like Habsburg Empire kind of deal. So like,
I mean, it had originally been larger.
yeah,
It was just kind of like a coalition of governments. At this period in time, it's kind of starting to wane, and so I think wane, not wax, right? Waning is getting smaller.
Yeah.
Waxing is getting bigger. So it's waning, and you kind of just have like Habsburg on. There's like a Spanish powerhouse, and then kind of like an Austrian.
Yeah, like Hungary and Croatia.
Yeah, so France is kind of like surrounded on either side by this quote-unquote Habsburg Empire. Go on.
Yeah. So that's where she's from, and that's kind of where a lot of kind of the support for the monarchy to remain in France is happening, because she's on the she was on the throne of France, and that's literally her family who's in the Habsburg Empire, and they're like, oh, we gotta go help our family to kind of restore them, and their families said they're gonna try and help each other out and make both do what's best for them using their country and stuff.
So Marie Antoinette she's the daughter of the Emperor and Empress of Austria, or the Holy Roman Empire at the time, if you will. And generally, she's a nice person. She's a very kind, loving queen. Not that intelligent when it comes to frugality. I mean, she just loves to spend. She would spend hours and hours paying someone to do her hair. She would just blow money throwing lavish parties and buying expensive jewelry. So she was a nice, kind person, but the people of France didn't like her because she was continually spending money when the country's already in economic turmoil. And she's the daughter of Austria, who has now just signed the Declaration of Pillnitz, or I think it was just, yeah, that's what it's called. Declaration of Pillnitz. And so France is like, the people of France are like, hey, this chick's kind of side, she's the enemy, and she's kind of a bad queen.
Like, she's just pretty, she's very disconnected from what kind of hardships and people experience in, like, the lower class and stuff. And there's, like, some kind of funny stories, like, on the Palace of Versailles, where her and King Louis spent most of their life, because they didn't really live in Paris. She had, like, a small farm, like, she had a farm built on the grounds of Versailles, just so then she can play at being, like, a farmer and stuff, and she would, like play with the sheep or whatever until she, like, got bored, and then she'd pay people to, like, so she was just, like, playing at doing work that people were forced to do. So,
I love that.
Yeah. So she was just very disconnected, and her obviously her ties with her family just kind of made more tension with kind of what the National Assembly was doing. But anyway, so this next point is, so there's a rumor going around that Marie Antoinette is just hoarding food in the Palace of Versailles, and a bunch of people are just getting kind of wind of this rumor, and eventually this leads to a women's march, and so on October 5th, just a bunch of women just kind of march onto the Palace of Versailles and kind of demand to just go through the palace and try to find these stores of food. And basically this happens, and they just decide, since they can't really trust the royals, because they're kind of, they've always just done things like King Louis kind of had, he was good in his intentions, and sometimes he would try to do things for the good of the people, but they just couldn't really trust him, especially with all the outer forces that were going on. So they forced him and the royal family to move to Paris, where the people could keep a closer eye on them. So they marched them from the Versailles to Paris to be watched more closely. But during this march, none of the royal family were hurt, but like some of, like, their close friends were, like, straight up murdered. Like, one of Marie Antoinette's, like, best friends was, like, killed and raped, and, like, fucking just body parts were just, like, on display and stuff. So that got them very, very anxious about what was going on. And then, so at this point, a bunch of nobles are starting to flee France, and a bunch of nobles are starting to leave France, and at this point, kind of King Louis and the royal family are kind of getting the same idea, because it's kind of getting dangerous, because they're just kind of at the will of the people for right now.
So we're at 1791 now. We have the royal family trying to duck out, trying to head over to Austria to meet up with Antoinette's family. And so they're leaving out the eastern countryside of France, and then they get stopped just kind of on a routine, I guess, people's army stop. I don't know. Just people.
Checkpoint.
Farmer checkpoint. Mm-hmm. So they walk up and they stop them, and they're like, hey, you kind of look like the royal family. And they're like, no, we're really not. And then they're like, no, we think you are. So now the royal family is in custody in Paris with the general people. Meanwhile, in the background of all of this happening, we got Robespierre rising up, kind of making moves towards the top. He will eventually actually become the leader of France. I don't know if he gets a real title. Probably does. Anyway.
Sure.
As of right now, he's just kind of making moves, and his National Assembly, along with what's called the group of Jacobins, I don't know, It's kind of this radical revolutionary group of people who just strongly believe in the revolution, ousting the monarchy. And they're this really radical group, and he's kind of the leader of them, and he's also kind of the leader of the National Assembly, which is at this time the leader of France. So he's kind of imparting these really radical ideals on the country, while now the royal family is in custody. So this is 1791. Eventually, on 1792, on January 21st, there are 1,200 horsemen. They actually go, they pick up the king, ride him into Paris, into the middle of the city, and he is executed via the guillotine. Guillotine. I think I've heard it pronounced with the L's. Guillotine? Guillotine?
I think there are L's in it.
There are L's, but
French doesn't make any sense. So.
Anyway, so the guillotine, I'm sure you've heard of it or seen it. It's the big thing where you lay down and then you pull the lever and the big blade comes down and cuts your head off. So this radical group of Jacobins, has been bringing these guillotines into kind of the town squares of a bunch of towns, and executing anti-revolutionaries. And so, via Robespierre's suggestion, this is done to the king as a show of force of the new government. Robespierre, although he kind of has this building hatred of the king, he actually doesn't go to his execution on the 21st. Which then, I guess we should talk about why the king was executed, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, so...
Treason is the short answer.
Yeah, like, treason, so basically, you know, his wife, Marie Antoinette, she's basically she's of the family of a bunch of monarchs who are trying to take France back and make it into a monarchy. They try to leave, and, you know, if they actually succeed in leaving, you know, eventually the army can come back and put them back on the throne. So basically, as long as King Louis and the royal family of France was alive, it was just like always like, oh, we could always have a resurgence of a monarchy. So you have to kill the monarchy now, who was, you know, just kind of there. It's like he was there because of heritage, and if you killed him now, and now you could only elect a monarchy into, because that's what they were trying. They were going for more of a voting process, like monarchies would be elected into ruling, and even like clergymen would be elected by their peers, and it wouldn't be that they were anointed by God, you know, in quotation marks, because you know, ultimately it was just other strong people deciding, like, oh, you do this for me, you get to be a bishop or whatever. So so they kill Louis to kind of secure that, you know, France is gonna be forever changed, really. And so basically, King Louis dies, the whole reign of terror happens, and Maximilian Robespierre killing a bunch of people, putting a bunch of people in prison, has some super radical ideas, and a majority of people are not on his side anymore. And basically there's like a counter revolution and so they stop the reign of terror. They arrest Maximilian Robespierre, eventually also gets guillotined. There's a lot of people getting guillotined.
A lot of people getting guillotined.
So he gets guillotined. Now there's just kind of like a big opening, like, what the fuck is going on? And so basically what France is really desiring right now is just any sort of stability and just kind of a back to normal. You know, they just want to...
Well, it gets even worse for a while, right? Because now right at this time, we kind of I'm gonna actually correct myself from a couple of minutes ago. The king died January 21st of 1793. I said 1792.
Rough.
So anyway, the king's gone, the queen's gone, and now the other countries are starting to invade, and you have like France's new military trying to fend off all these other countries. It actually works. They somehow take it over, or they don't take it over. They keep it. They don't let it get taken over, which kind of leads into like the final phase of the quote unquote revolution, which where it kind of comes full circle.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, there's like a big opening. They're just wanting some stability, and like Nate said, all these wars are happening around, and somehow miraculously, they're winning all of them. They're winning all of them.
I mean, they have good leadership
Mm-hmm.
in terms of military generals.
Yeah, and that one would be Napoleon Bonaparte, and so he's a general, and he's just winning all these battles for France, and and what could have been a super and basically France just being overrun by and becoming like non-existent anymore, and becoming like just parted out to other European countries. So he returns to Paris a war hero, and everyone's just kind of ecstatic and grateful and happy that he won all these battles for them, and they're kind of looking for new leadership, and who's better to give the leadership to than the man who kind of saved it all. So Napoleon becomes the new head honcho, and he essentially becomes a monarch, but everyone's okay with this one. Everyone's okay.
We're okay with this monarch.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then that's kind of where Napoleon's story starts. And
So he's a young guy, came up.
short.
He's not that. He's
He's
relatively
about that
average.
tall. Yeah, he's
So he's a young guy who comes up from a military school, a pretty regular family, really bright guy, wins a bunch of wars. People really like him, and they're like, "Hey, why don't you be in charge?" And he's like, "Okay, sure." And then he declares himself the Emperor of France, which is a title no one's had before. And then he just kind of starts his own monarchy. He's a really interesting character. He could use his own podcast by himself, just with all of the feats that he achieved. So potentially a later date on that one, but that's kind of where it ends. It's kind of like France started off with a monarch and then ended with a monarch after 10 years of ended with an emperor after 10 years of kind of shitstorming. So yeah, it did change the world, right? I mean, it showed the might of kind of enlightenment, meaning you no longer rely just on God or what the government says. You kind of some free thinking. And it definitely played a big role in world evolution thereafter, I think, as did the American Revolution, but the France just kind of really compiled to that. So interesting history.
Stuff. Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of
that's the podcast.
Yeah, that's the podcast.
That's it.
That's the final note.
That's how it ends.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway, catch us next time
When we talk about